Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When Cody Bryson bought his peaceful lakeside retreat, he expected quiet mornings and fishing at dawn, not a war with a power-hungry HOA president. But when fake maps, midnight intrusions, and threats start flying, one thing becomes clear: they picked the wrong man to mess with. The morning air over the valley was so still you could almost hear the mist move. I had been up since before dawn, brewed a mug of strong coffee, and walked down the narrow path that led from my ranch house to the small wooden dock at the edge of my lake. The boards creaked familiarly under my boots as I set my tackle box down and cast the first line of the day into the dark, glassy water. This was what I had bought this place for: quiet, privacy, and the ritual of fishing at first light. The mist curled around the cattails and drifted low over the water, swallowing the sound of the distant highway. The only noise was the plop of my lure and the soft hiss of the line as it settled. For the first time in weeks, I felt the kind of calm that makes your shoulders drop without you realizing it. I'd been here long enough now to make the place mine. New signs reading private property and no trespassing were bolted to the trees along the road, the kind of big reflective ones you couldn't miss, even at night. The lake wasn't some decorative pond. It was a registered body of water that came with my deed, stocked with trout and bass by the previous owner. There was a narrow bench on the dock where I kept 2 rods propped against the rail and a thermos waiting in the shade. I had even mounted a small camera under the eave of the boathouse. Nothing fancy, just enough to catch anyone wandering where they shouldn't. This was my retreat, my reward after years of deployments and contracts, and I wasn't about to let anyone disturb it. About 15 minutes into my second cast, a high-pitched electric whine broke the stillness. Across the gravel road, a little golf cart appeared, white with a green HOA emblem stenciled on the side. At the wheel sat a woman in a lemon-colored windbreaker and oversized sunglasses, her hair a perfectly sprayed helmet of silver blonde. She slowed as she reached the edge of my property and then stopped entirely, engine idling. Without so much as a hello, she raised her phone and began snapping pictures of me, like I was some kind of escaped zoo exhibit. "This is restricted water," she barked across the cattails. "You can't fish here without a permit." I rested my rod in the holder and waved her off with the kind of polite smile you use on stray dogs. "Private property," I called back. "Move along." She didn't. She zoomed in with her phone, muttered something into the screen, then spun the cart around and sped off back toward the subdivision. I shook my head and took another sip of coffee. HOA people. I'd seen their type on deployments, little emperors of tiny fiefdoms. As far as I was concerned, the new president of Clear Pines Lakeside could go pound sand. My line trembled. I reeled slowly, more focused on the water than the nonsense behind me. 10 minutes later, the sound of engines returned, lower and heavier this time. 2 county patrol cars rolled up the gravel shoulder and stopped at my gate with lights flashing. I set my rod down and walked up the slope from the dock, coffee still in hand. 2 uniformed officers stepped out, looking more confused than aggressive. Behind them, the same golf cart idled, and the silver-blonde woman was standing with her arms folded, a self-satisfied smile plastered on her face. "That's him," she said loudly. "He's trespassing and poaching fish from our HOA lake. We've sent him notices. He's violating community environmental rules." One officer turned to me, brows furrowed. "Sir, can we see some ID and any paperwork for this property?" he asked, voice neutral but wary. I handed him my driver's license, then opened the weatherproof tube I kept by the gate. Out came a laminated topographical map and a certified copy of my deed. "Name's Cody Bryson. This is my ranch. That lake," I pointed, "is entirely inside my property lines. It's on my deed. It's a registered private waterway. Those signs on the trees, they're not decoration." While one officer examined the map against his GPS, I tapped my phone and pulled up the live feed from my boathouse camera. It clearly showed the woman driving her cart right up to my boundary and filming me before calling. "Here's your complainant. 5 minutes before you arrived," I said dryly. "I was fishing. On my dock. On my lake." The officer's lips pressed into a thin line. His partner handed the documents back to me with a small nod. "Everything looks in order, Mr. Bryson. Sorry for the inconvenience." They turned to the woman. "Ma'am, this isn't an HOA lake. It's private property. You can't call in trespassing complaints for land that isn't yours." Her smile cracked into a scowl. "This isn't over," she hissed. "We'll see him in court. That fish is stolen water property." She hopped back into her golf cart and sped off, tires spitting gravel. The officers gave me apologetic shrugs, climbed back into their cars, and drove away without their lights. I stood there for a long moment, the mist rising behind me and the echo of her threat still hanging in the air, before walking back down to the dock and picking up my rod again. The envelope came in the mail 3 days later, cream-colored with a gold-embossed seal that read, "Clear Pines Lakeside Homeowners Association." I held it between two fingers like it might be contagious. It wasn't addressed to resident or occupant, but to me, by full name, Cody Bryson. I hadn't signed up for anything, hadn't filled out any welcome packets, hadn't stepped a foot onto their side of the road. Still, the HOA had somehow decided I needed to be formally warned. I opened it at the kitchen table with a knife and a glass of bourbon. The letter was written in that officious, sanctimonious tone that people use when they're certain they're right and have a clipboard to prove it. According to community records, it said, "My property contained a section of the lake designated as Shared Ecological Wetland Reserve Saforsain. My continued use of said waterway for private fishing purposes was in direct violation of HOA Environmental Preservation Article 6A. The letter demanded I cease extractive activities, dismantle unauthorized watercraft infrastructure, aka my goddamn dock, and grant access to a designated HOA ecological inspector within 5 business days. A map was included, one I hadn't seen before. I unfolded it and frowned. Someone had used a highlighter to outline an irregular green boundary that cut through the lower quarter of my lake like a drunk trying to draw a straight line. According to this drawing, my property line bent just enough to include a wedge of shoreline within the HOA's jurisdiction, but I'd seen the actual survey. Hell, I'd walked the corners with GPS. This map wasn't just wrong, it was fabricated. I didn't waste time. That same afternoon, I drove into town, walked into the county assessor's office, and pulled the official parcel map. My suspicions were confirmed. The entire lake, every shoreline tree and inch of bank, sat well within my property line. I asked the clerk to print and notarize a fresh copy, and then walked it right next door to the county recorder, where I requested a certified statement of ownership and boundary integrity. I also requested a legal notice of challenge be filed against any conflicting map submissions related to Parcel 18B, which just so happened to be mine. Back at home, I scanned and sent everything to my lawyer, Darlene Cates, a compact woman with the voice of a rattlesnake and a background in property litigation. I'd worked with her once before in Boise on a contractor zoning issue, and she didn't lose cases. She called me back within the hour. "They forged a map," she said. "That's not just civil overreach. That's potentially criminal misrepresentation of land boundaries. You want me to notify the HOA's legal counsel or let them hang themselves further?" I told her to let them swing a bit longer. We weren't going to warn them this early. Later that night, I started receiving strange emails from neighbors I hadn't met. One accused me of polluting the community's natural resources. Another said my dock was bringing down property values and threatened to report me to the Idaho Environmental Quality Board. Someone even claimed I had left garbage in the lake, as if a bait box and a folding chair were some ecological catastrophe. I hadn't even met these people, but they were ready to light torches because Queen Karen had told them I was a swamp goblin ruining their HOA utopia. The cherry on top came the next morning when I found a rolled-up note in a plastic sleeve taped to the metal post by my mailbox. The handwriting was in red marker and all caps. "Remove the illegal pier immediately or face HOA action. You have been warned." There was no name, no signature, just the HOA logo printed in the corner like it was supposed to mean something. I walked down to the dock, sat on my bench, and looked out over the water. The sun was just coming up, and the lake was quiet except for the warble of ducks in the reeds. I leaned back and closed my eyes. They weren't going to stop. They thought if they yelled loud enough, lied often enough, and drew enough fake lines on enough fake maps, they could bully me off my own land. What they didn't realize was that I'd spent most of my adult life in hostile territory, dodging mortars and fixing airstrips under fire. If they wanted a war over a piece of water, they picked the wrong damn fishermen. It was the kind of night when the lake turns black and the trees stand like shadows of giants. I had gone to bed early, tired from a long day of fence repairs and calls with Darlene, but the alert from my boathouse camera pinged my phone at 3:14 in the morning. Motion detected. The thumbnail image showed a beam of light cutting across my dock. My gut clenched. I slid out of bed, pulled on jeans and boots, and grabbed the heavy-duty flashlight I kept by the door. The air outside was damp and smelled of pine and wet earth. The gravel crunched under my boots as I headed down toward the water. As I came down the slope, the figure came into focus. A man in a dark uniform, reflective strips on his vest, clipboard in one hand, flashlight in the other. He was standing on my dock, bent over like he was measuring something at the edge. "Can I help you?" I called, voice carrying across the water. He straightened slowly, startled but trying to look official. "I'm conducting an inspection," he said, flashing a badge-shaped patch on his vest that read, "Clear Pines Lakeside Security. Your pier may be in violation of our community standards. I need to document its dimensions." I stopped at the start of the dock, my flashlight beam locking onto his face. "This isn't your community," I said evenly, "and that's not your pier. You're on private property at 3 in the morning without my permission. Put the clipboard down and step off." He shifted his weight, still holding his light like a weapon. "Sir, the HOA has jurisdiction over this section of shoreline. This inspection is mandatory." He sounded like a rent-a-cop reading from a script. My patience snapped. "You've got about 30 seconds to leave before this stops being a conversation." I pulled my phone from my pocket and started recording. "State your name," I said, "and what legal authority you think you have to be here at night on my property." He hesitated, then muttered a name. Didn't matter. The camera caught it. "This is for your own good, Mr. Bryson," he added, like he was doing me a favor. Karen said, "That was all I needed to hear." I stepped back, thumbed 911, and put the phone on speaker. "Yes, I need county deputies at Bryson Ranch immediately," I told the dispatcher. "I have an intruder claiming to be a security inspector for an HOA. He's on my dock right now without permission. I have video." While we waited, I kept the flashlight on him, my other hand resting near the pocket knife on my belt. Not that I wanted trouble, but a man creeping around at night with a badge patch wasn't going to catch me off guard. He shifted, looked back toward the tree line, clearly debating whether to run. "Stay right where you are," I warned. "If you leave before the deputies arrive, that's flight." 5 minutes later, headlights cut through the trees. 2 deputies got out, hands on their holsters, taking in the scene with quick eyes. "Evening, Mr. Bryson," one said, same older officer from the first incident. "Who do we have here?" I gestured with my light. "This man claims to be an HOA inspector checking my dock at 3 in the morning." The deputy turned to the man. "Sir, do you have any paperwork authorizing you to be here?" The guy's voice faltered. "I was instructed by President Talbot. This is a shared waterway. I'm allowed to—" The deputy cut him off. "No, you're not. This is private property. You're trespassing. Hands where I can see them." They cuffed him right there on the dock while I recorded the whole thing. One deputy collected his clipboard and flashlight. Inside the folder were printed HOA forms with my name scribbled across the top under the words "Mandatory Compliance Inspection." The deputy flipped through them and gave a low whistle. "Mr. Bryson, we're going to take him in for trespass and attempted unlawful inspection. You'll need to come by the station tomorrow to file a full statement." I nodded. "Happy to." As they led him up the slope toward the patrol car, he looked over his shoulder at me. "You're making a mistake," he muttered. "This will all be sorted out." I just kept the camera steady until the door closed on him and the cruiser pulled away. The night fell silent again, except for the frogs croaking along the banks. I stood on my dock for a long time after they left, the light from my flashlight flickering across the water, wondering how far Karen thought she could push before something snapped. The morning after the dock incident, I barely had time to drink my coffee before the next fire started. My phone buzzed nonstop, calls, texts, even a few voicemails from numbers I didn't recognize. One message stood out. "You're gonna regret what you did to Martin. He was just doing his job. You HOA-hating psycho." No signature. Another one came through while I was feeding the chickens. "You're not welcome here, Bryson. Stay on your side of the lake." That afternoon, I found the first physical message, a red flyer taped to my mailbox and every tree along the road. Warning: violator on Lot 18B. Repeated offenses against environmental harmony. Residents, remain vigilant. The paper had the HOA logo watermarked behind the text and an image of my dock blurred in the background. This was no longer just Karen screeching from her golf cart. It was a coordinated campaign. I drove into town and filed the official complaint at the sheriff's office. I handed them the flyer, the phone screenshots, and a printout of the HOA email blast that had gone out earlier that morning. One of my neighbors had forwarded it. The subject line, Community Safety Alert, Hostile Resident Engaging in Illegal Activities. The body of the message accused me of threatening an inspector, contaminating the lake with fishing waste, and creating a hostile and unsafe environment for families and children. Later that evening, while walking the property line near the lake, I saw fresh tire tracks cutting through the pine needles near the north fence, just past where the camera coverage ended. I followed them 50 feet into the trees and found a crushed soda can and a cigarette butt next to a scorched patch of grass. At first, I thought maybe kids had snuck in, but then I saw the charred plastic, the melted remains of a waste bin I'd mounted near the side trail, the one I used for collecting fishing line scraps and trash. It had been burned. I checked the nearby motion sensor. It had been tripped at 1:27 a.m., but the battery had gone dead before it could record anything. Convenient. I replaced it that night and added 2 more cameras with overlapping coverage. By morning, I had the footage routed straight to my laptop and a backup server in Boise. That day, I also reached out to a drone surveyor I knew, someone who'd helped me during a wildfire damage assessment years ago. I hired him to fly a full loop around my lake and capture aerial photos, both for documentation and future legal proceedings. I wanted proof that my structures, dock, boathouse, fences were all intact, compliant, and clearly on my side of the property line. In the meantime, the HOA forum posts escalated. Someone uploaded a blurry nighttime image of me walking with a flashlight and labeled it Stalker Alert. Another resident commented, "This guy's a danger to our community. What if he has weapons?" I knew exactly who was feeding them this poison. Karen had weaponized paranoia, and it was working. That evening, 2 pickup trucks from the HOA neighborhood drove slowly past my entrance, their drivers glaring through the windshield. One rolled down the window and shouted, "Why don't you pack up and get out before someone gets hurt?" I recorded every plate number, every threat, every email. Darlene was already working on a cease and desist letter targeting both the HOA board and Karen personally, but I knew it wouldn't be enough. These people weren't just pushing boundaries, they were testing how far they could go before the law caught up. And judging by the scorched ground and fake flyers, they were getting bolder. The final straw came when I checked my mailbox the next morning and found a typed letter, unsigned but stamped with a clear pine seal. If the pier is not dismantled within 72 hours, the HOA will consider alternative enforcement. What the hell did that mean? Alternative enforcement? Who gave them the authority to talk like that? That same afternoon, I installed floodlights along the tree line, added a motion-sensing perimeter alarm, and mounted a 24-hour video surveillance private property sign every 50 feet. I also sent the letter to Darlene, who looped in the county prosecutor. "This is teetering on the edge of criminal coercion," she said. "We'll push for charges if they take even one step onto your land again." I didn't sleep much that night. The lake was calm, the air still, but every snap of a twig, every gust of wind against the siding made my hand twitch toward the flashlight. They hadn't just declared war on my dock. They were trying to break me down, inch by inch. But I wasn't going anywhere. They wanted escalation? Fine. They'd get escalation. The knock came just after noon, while I was fitting a new solar panel to the shed roof. I climbed down the ladder and spotted a man in khakis and a button-down shirt waiting at the gate, holding a clipboard and a folder under his arm. He wasn't HOA. Too polished. I opened the gate slowly, keeping the steel latch in hand. "Afternoon," he said with a nod. "Name's Eric Woodson. I'm with the Valley County Land Registrar's office. Mind if we talk?" That raised every alarm bell I had. "About what?" I asked flatly. He shifted a little. "We've received an application packet from Clear Pines Lakeside HOA requesting a boundary update to include a portion of the lake adjacent to your property. They're citing an environmental easement and historic maintenance jurisdiction. I'm just here to do the preliminary site review." I stared at him. "That's a hell of a claim," I said. "And it's complete bullshit." He raised a hand, trying to stay neutral. "Look, I'm not here to enforce anything. I'm just the middleman. But I do need to take a look at the property line and compare it to the application. You can walk with me if you want." I called Darlene on speaker and explained the situation. She told me to let him walk only the exterior easement, nowhere near the lake, and to get copies of every document he brought. I agreed. Eric seemed like a decent guy, just caught in the bureaucratic crossfire. As we walked the southern boundary, he muttered, "They're doing this a lot lately. You're the fourth case like this I've seen this year." That stuck with me. After he left, I asked Darlene to dig into HOA filing records. She came back 2 days later with gold. Turns out Karen Talbot, in her official capacity as HOA president, had submitted 7 applications since 2019 requesting expansions of HOA oversight, each one involving shoreline properties not originally under HOA jurisdiction. In 3 of those cases, she'd used outdated survey maps or non-existent ecological designations to justify the claims. One case had already resulted in a lawsuit and quiet payout. Karen wasn't just power-hungry. She was executing a pattern. Her game was simple. Manufacture fake authority over lakeside lots, file paperwork just official enough to confuse people, and wear them down with letters, fines, and pressure until they either complied or sold. I reached out to the family involved in the earlier lawsuit, a retired couple named John and Nancy Myers. They lived on the opposite side of the lake, right outside HOA lines like me. Karen had tried to claim their dock was built over a protected breeding ground for migratory birds and sent them a cease and desist, demanding its removal. They'd sued and won, but quietly. "We were tired," Nancy told me. "Didn't want to fight, just wanted to be left alone. But if you're taking her on, we'll back you." Another family I called had their property value tank after HOA claims made it into public records, scaring off buyers. I added both families to a new folder labeled Collective Plaintiffs, Preliminary. Darlene was already drafting the framework for a group lawsuit. Meanwhile, the harassment didn't let up. Someone dumped a dead fish on my driveway with a note pinned through its gill. "Hope the next one chokes you." A few nights later, my mailbox was knocked clean off its post. I filed police reports for both, but unless I caught someone red-handed, they were just chalked up to unidentified vandalism. Then came the HOA newsletter, printed on glossy paper, folded into every resident's door, and full of cheerful stock images of smiling families kayaking. Page 2 had a section titled Community Update, Lake Zone Security. It claimed that a non-compliant resident on the East Shore was under legal review for illegally modifying the shared aquatic buffer and hostile actions toward community officers. The article didn't name me, but everyone knew who they meant. I went back to my dock that evening, sat on the bench with my coffee, and watched the clouds move over the lake. The fish didn't seem to care about jurisdiction or newsletters, but I did. I wasn't just defending my land anymore. I was unraveling a full-blown fraud operation disguised as suburban governance. Before bed, I added a line to my notebook under the heading Evidence Timeline, June 12th, 3:14 a.m. HOA Security Officer trespassed, June 15th. Karen submits false boundary map, June 18th. Land Registrar visit, attempted jurisdictional claim, June 20th. Harassment escalates, fish threat, mailbox destruction. June 21st, an HOA newsletter defames me publicly. It was adding up, and soon, so would the charges. By the time the 4th of July rolled around, I had cameras mounted on every corner of the house and motion sensors near the dock. What was once a peaceful lakeside retreat had turned into a goddamn surveillance bunker. And it wasn't paranoia. It was preparation. I already had one trespassing incident on record, and I wasn't about to let the next one slide without consequences. That night, I sat on the porch with a glass of bourbon, listening to the crackle of distant fireworks echo over the trees. Then I heard a softer sound, something like boots on pine needles. The security light above the garage flicked on. I stood slowly, set my glass down, and reached for the Mossberg pump under the bench, just in case. I didn't go looking for trouble, but I damn sure knew how to finish it. I flicked on the flashlight and crept toward the path leading to the lake. The dock's silhouette was still, but just past it, at the tree line, I caught movement. A man in a dark uniform, same kind the HOA security had worn before, stood inspecting the wooden planks with a clipboard. I kept my distance, aimed the light at his chest. "You're on private property," I said. "Identify yourself." He blinked into the light but didn't flinch. "HOA compliance inspection. I'm authorized to evaluate lakeside structures for community safety violations." I stepped closer. "This isn't HOA land. You're trespassing. Leave now or I call the sheriff." He didn't move. "I have jurisdiction under Emergency Ordinance CP 19A. he said flatly. I recognized that from the fake paperwork Karen had included in the earlier violation notice. It wasn't a real ordinance. It was part of the same pile of garbage she used to intimidate people. So I dialed the sheriff right there in front of him, kept the camera rolling the whole time. He still didn't leave, claimed he had authority to complete the inspection. By the time 2 deputies arrived, I had 15 minutes of footage showing him refusing to leave private land. They cuffed him for criminal trespass and impersonating an enforcement officer. The next morning, Darlene filed a formal injunction request. That video alone could get a judge to issue a no-contact and no-access order against the HOA, pending investigation. But we were just getting started. The deputies were kind enough to let me know they'd pulled the guy's car registration. He wasn't even licensed security, just a local with a misdemeanor record for harassment and no official ties to any registered agency. Paid under the table by the HOA. And if Karen was willing to send a fake inspector in the dead of night, she was desperate. That week, we served the HOA board with a cease and desist for all unauthorized contact and access attempts. The document included the video, the forged ordinance, and the full boundary map with legal overlays from the county registrar. It was airtight. I figured that would cool them off. I figured wrong. 3 days later, I got a letter in a thick envelope from an HOA lawyer named Mitchell Reese. It accused me of ongoing violations of community environmental protocols, destruction of shared natural resources, and, you guessed it, operating an unregistered dock and illegal fishery. An illegal fishery on my own lake. I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my coffee, but the tone wasn't funny. It included threats of civil action, daily fines of $200, and mandatory access for licensed HOA eco-assessors. Darlene was already prepping the counter, but I knew what this really meant. They were trying to bury me in paper, drain me legally and financially until I either surrendered or sold. So I called the local ABC affiliate. A reporter named Grace Whitaker came out the next morning. Young, sharp, no patience for HOA nonsense. I gave her everything, the documents, the videos, even the copy of the fish note. She interviewed me right on the dock. That afternoon, her report aired statewide under the headline, HOA claims Man's Lake as their own, but county records say otherwise. The reaction was immediate. My phone lit up with texts from neighbors who'd kept quiet until now. People outside the HOA bubble who'd been pushed, fined, or threatened. Karen had ruled the Clear Pines Lakeside HOA like a suburban queen for years, and now her crown was starting to slip. The next day, a sheriff's cruiser showed up at Karen Talbot's house. She wasn't arrested, but she was served a court summons. The complaint listed me as the lead plaintiff in a civil harassment and fraud case. But I wasn't the only name on that paper. There were 3 others. And counting. By the end of that week, my front porch had started to resemble a makeshift legal office. Between Darlene's growing binder of evidence, the stack of certified mail from the HOA's increasingly desperate attorney, and the influx of letters and emails from other affected landowners, it was clear this thing had grown far beyond just me and my dock. What started as a woman screaming at me over a fishing rod had turned into something a hell of a lot bigger, something systemic. Darlene and I drove into the county clerk's office the following Monday. We weren't just there to file updated materials for the injunction. We wanted to pull every land filing, map, and HOA expansion request Karen Talbot had ever submitted. The clerk, a graying man with a badge that said Harlan, raised an eyebrow when we asked for the whole stack. "You're not the first to dig into this," he said, disappearing into the back. He returned 20 minutes later with a box full of files marked Clear Pines Lakeside HOA Expansion. There were 7 applications in total, dated from early 2019 to just a few months ago. Each one tried to redraw the boundaries of the HOA, often by sneaking in sections of adjacent land, wooded areas, shorelines, even old access roads that no longer existed. And here's the kicker. 2 of the maps showed my lake, not the edge, not a small piece. The entire damn lake, labeled in neat little handwriting as Community Shared Water Resource. Darlene's face was stone cold. This isn't just harassment, this is organized land encroachment, fraudulent filings. It got worse. Of the 7 filings, 3 had been approved by the Planning Commission because nobody challenged them at the time. Karen had slipped them through during holidays, weekends, and dead periods when most property owners weren't even aware meetings were being held. and the most recent filing was still pending, attempting to retroactively annex the southern shore of my property. That filing had a forged signature from someone claiming to be me. Only problem? My name was spelled wrong, and the signature didn't match anything I'd ever written. Darlene made 3 calls right there from the clerk's office. 1 to the county investigator, 1 to the DA's office, and 1 to a contact at the local news station. The fire had officially been lit. That evening, as I sat by the lake with the sun dropping behind the pines, I watched a family of deer walk across the far edge of the property. The stillness almost made me forget the storm brewing. Then my phone buzzed. A voicemail from Grace Whitaker, the reporter. "Cody, you're going to want to see this. I just spoke to a former HOA board member. She resigned last year, and she says Karen's been doctoring maps for years, pressuring people to give up land in exchange for community benefits. Some of them were elderly. Some had no idea what they were signing. I knew it was time to stop playing defense. The next day, with Darlene's help, we filed a formal motion to expand the case. Not just trespassing, not just harassment, attempted fraudulent annexation, and civil conspiracy to defraud private landowners. We added the names of 3 other plaintiffs who had come forward, including a retired schoolteacher whose backyard had been slowly swallowed up by HOA-planted public path signs. And then came the call I didn't expect. A man named Ellis Green, early 60s, soft-spoken, left a voicemail saying, "Sir, I believe we may have something in common. My wife and I sold you that property last spring. Karen tried to pressure us, too. I kept a file. If you'd be willing to meet, I think it's time someone stopped her." We met at a diner just outside of town. Ellis slid a thick envelope across the table. Letters, maps, emails from Karen, even a voicemail where she told him, "Don't worry, we'll take care of the lake once you're gone." The kicker? A notarized letter from Ellis stating that he never granted access or usage rights to any HOA. Not once. It was the missing puzzle piece. A direct line showing Karen's attempt to manipulate multiple owners, one after another, in a calculated campaign to grab property under the guise of preserving the environment. And with that, the civil case became something else entirely. The DA opened a formal investigation. Karen had officially crossed from petty HOA queen into potential felon territory. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. No polished oak benches or grand marble pillars like in the movies, just beige walls, fluorescent lights, and the low hum of an overworked HVAC system. Still, as I sat at the plaintiff's table, flanked by Darlene and the 3 other landowners who had joined the suit, the weight of the moment felt massive. For once, Karen Talbot wasn't strutting across a freshly swept cul-de-sac or barking orders to HOA minions. She was seated 2 rows back in the defendant's section, arms crossed, eyes bloodshot, her once immaculate bob looking a little frayed around the edges. The judge called the room to order. The prosecution began laying out the timeline, starting with Karen's false 911 call, moving through the forged maps, and culminating in the attempted annexation filings with my lake labeled as HOA Common Space. Each exhibit was methodically introduced. Notarized letters, camera footage, land deeds, even the recording where Karen screamed into her phone that I was stealing fish from HOA water. It played over the court speakers like a bad radio drama. A few people even chuckled. Karen winced. Then came the turning point. Ellis Green took the stand, calm, polite, impeccably dressed. He described the pressure Karen had put on him to sell not just the land, but the idea that the HOA would inherit the lake. He mentioned the envelope of cash she once offered to ease the process. When Darlene asked him how he responded, Ellis looked straight at the jury and said, "I told her that lakes don't come with owners like hand-me-down sweaters, and I made damn sure she'd never touch it." After that, it was my turn. I kept it simple. I told them about the fishing morning, the cops, the forged documents, the HOA inspector in the woods. I showed the judge the photo of the sign I'd hung on the dock after the lawsuit began. Private property, no HOA beyond this point. Got a smirk out of him. Karen's defense didn't hold. Her lawyer tried to paint her as a passionate community advocate and blamed everything on clerical misunderstandings and miscommunications with surveyors. But the jury wasn't buying it. Not after hearing the ex-HOA board member testify about the threats, the fake expansion meetings, and Karen's habit of shouting down anyone who questioned her vision. The deliberation took under 2 hours. The judge returned to deliver the verdict: guilty on all civil counts, fraudulent filings, harassment, trespassing, and defamation. Karen was fined $50,000 in damages, banned from holding any HOA leadership position for 10 years, and sentenced to 1 year of probation. The HOA itself was ordered to issue formal written apologies to all affected landowners and to cover legal costs in full. But that wasn't all. The DA's office announced that a criminal investigation was underway, digging into whether Karen had knowingly falsified public records. That meant potential felony charges. The courtroom buzzed like a kicked beehive. Karen's face went pale. 3 days later, I returned to the lake. It was late evening, just cool enough for a hoodie. The water shimmered in the fading light, peaceful in a way it hadn't been in months. I brought out my fishing gear and sat down on the bench I'd refinished myself. Next to me, freshly installed, was a bronze plaque on the dock's railing. It read, "Caught a big fish," then "Caught Karen." Both put up a fight. Only one ended up back in the lake. I chuckled and cast the line. No sirens, no golf carts, just the sound of the water and the occasional splash of a fish that didn't know it was swimming free.